Hello, Michigan nonprofit community. Kelly Kuhn, Vice President of the Michigan Nonprofit Association here. Delighted to be joining anybody that's reading and downloading this video at this time. We know this is crazy COVID times. We know that impacts to nonprofits were instant. We also know that impacts by COVID-19 will have lasting effects for nonprofits. So much so that we are thinking about the resources that we can put forth and out there when nonprofits need them. And unfortunately, some of that is probably not positive. And we want to make sure that you're equipped with as much information, experiences from the field, just to talk about options as you might contemplate what future holds for you and your organization. These are things like mergers, acquisitions. These are things like possible dissolutions for you. And I know some of you are probably going to be a little surprised to even understand and hear this, but there is such thing as bankruptcy for nonprofits. And so today, we are recording this opportunity to actually hear from the field of a nonprofit that experienced bankruptcy and came out on the other side. I am so delighted to be able to have access to this experience myself, as well as to bring it to all of you that may find it useful and beneficial. So we're just going to kick off an interview and ask some questions and dig a little deeper and hopefully provide some perspective. I'm pleased to be joined today by Liz and Jenna, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves and just tell us who they are and what was their involvement in the bankruptcy for the YMCA of Marquette.
Hi, I'm Liz Von Eitzen. I'm a partner at Warner Norcross and Judd, which is a law firm. We have 8 offices throughout the state of Michigan. I primarily am located in our Kalamazoo office. I do bankruptcy and creditors' rights with probably about 90% of my work is bankruptcy related. I had the honor of serving as counsel for the YMCA in their bankruptcy case and working hand in hand with Jenna and the rest of the board of directors for the YMCA.
Hello, I'm Jenna Zadunik, and so I am the permanent CEO now at the Y in Marquette, and we serve the Marquette County community. We have 2 locations in Marquette and Negaunee, and we also serve the community in Gwinn with some food and childcare programs. We serve about 5,000 members, and I have been with the Y almost 19 and a half years now. But in March of 2016, I was the health and fitness director here at the Y, which was much less stressful. And I became the emergency CEO in March 15, 2016, when this all began, our almost 5-year story and journey of what we went through.
All right, thank you both for that great introduction. And wow, Jenna, to think that long with the organization and then just to think about the time frame. So I hope those that are listening understood that it's not as if it's a quick timeline, that there is a lot of ins and outs to this. And so I appreciate that, because setting the expectation for that I think is important for people. And maybe before we kick into your specific experience, Liz, could you just maybe give us kind of a sense of what bankruptcy is, maybe just like a short understanding of it for some that, again, just are kind of blown away to think that this could be an option.
Sure. As it relates to organizations, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, typically your 2 options are Chapter 7 or Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Chapter 7 is, I think, what most people think of when they think of a bankruptcy, which is a liquidation. That's where the company comes in and says, we're done. We're not going to continue operating. Whatever assets we have, we're going to hand over to the Chapter 7 trustee, and the Chapter 7 trustee is going to liquidate those assets and then distribute the funds to creditors in order of priority. Then the other option is a Chapter 11. A Chapter 11 plan or bankruptcy case it is pursuant to the terms of a plan. So Chapter 11 can either be a reorganization, or sometimes it starts as a reorganization and ends up being a liquidation, or they know all along it's going to be a liquidation, but the debtor wants to maintain control. So in a Chapter 7, the company, as soon as they file, the company loses all control over its assets and the direction that the bankruptcy is going to take. And instead, it's run by the Chapter 7 trustee. In a Chapter 11, it's run by the debtor in possession. So the company continues control over the organization and really sets the path that the bankruptcy is going to follow, subject to the terms of the bankruptcy code and the relevant case law. So the Chapter 11, as I said, it could either be a liquidation or a reorganization. And the goal, I think, is to be able to reorganize, to come out on the other side and have the company continue to operate and thrive. And using the bankruptcy code and the bankruptcy process as a tool to get its debts under control and set a really clear financial path going forward. We have it just went into effect earlier this year, a subchapter 5. And what that allows is, it used to be that a Chapter 11 was a one size fit all. No matter if you were a company that was $1 billion a year company or a company that had $1 million in revenue or less, you had the same path, the same rules and regulations that had to be followed. Now we have the subchapter 5, which is really helpful for smaller businesses, and a lot of nonprofits will fit into that category. It really streamlines the process. It was not available when we get into the YMCA. It was not available to the YMCA of Marquette because it wasn't in existence yet, but they would have otherwise qualified to do a subchapter 5 bankruptcy at that time. And we'll get into, I think, more of what the process is, but it gets rid of a lot of the time and a lot of the requirements that a regular Chapter 11 case has to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much on that overview. So a couple things. One, what was the official filing for the YMCA based on the description that you just provided?
It was a Chapter 11, and so the YMCA maintained control from start to finish in the process. It was, from the time I was involved, it was always to reorganize. I don't think we ever even wanted to think about the aspect that this was going to liquidate. This was not going to happen. We were all on board with what can we do to make this work, to reorganize. And so it was a Chapter 11 reorganization from start to finish.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying that and describing that and providing the context to say it was intended to reorganize. It's a tool. I love the way that you described that. I think that's so important for nonprofits to hear, board members and directors and founding executive directors, right? And so thank you for providing that additional clarity and context. And before we get into the questions, I recognize and just want everybody who's viewing this to understand that there may be things and aspects of this that are very specific and need to be kept confidential. So we're going to be ultra mindful of that as we go through the interview, and certainly just want to put that disclaimer out there before we begin. So maybe Jenna, if you can describe to us what were some of the drivers or some of the reasons for considering this option for the YMCA?
Sure. I think the word bankruptcy is very, very scary, and it was to me at first. I mean, we call it the B word, which used to be budget season, but now it's bankruptcy. And so we thought of it as just this awful thing, and to maybe some people it is, but really, truly, it ended up we're on the other side and we're strong. And so I just want people to realize that it doesn't have to be that. It was actually a wonderful process for us through the reorganization. So don't be afraid. So the drivers were quite a few things. An expansion that was overzealous with previous leadership. And so there was a $3 million USDA loan taken out for an expansion. But unfortunately, the capital campaign, the funds were not raised prior to breaking ground, which I think any nonprofit knows raise at least, I know there's different percentages out there, but some say 80%, some say 90%. I know that myself and my board would never do anything unless we had 100% of the funds raised. There was also a child care center, or a building bought for a child care center that was losing an exorbitant amount of money. And then a new facility in our west end of our county that was purchased, and remodeling done to both of those. So within about a year, 12 to 18 month time period, there was, huge expansion, $3 million loan, not grant from the USDA. Of course, we know loans you have to pay back. And then $1 million facility built for a childcare center, and $1 million facility bought for a second facility in Negaunee. We already had one, but a new building. And so basically within that 18 months, it was about $7 million of debt on a $2.3 million budget. And so for any nonprofit, that's of course a huge amount. And, just a lot of staff, probably more staff than a nonprofit our size in our community, in our rural community. There were many factors, but those were the largest ones, was that those two buildings, as well as the loan, and then not raising the funds prior to kind of all this happening.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, again, we appreciate your transparency, and you're willing to just, be brave to put out there that this is the situation that we found ourselves in, right? So even the best laid plans sometimes don't come to fruition in the way that we imagined that they would. And I feel like there's, many nonprofits that, COVID has done that for them. And they had plans, and they had intentions, and they had strategies. And so I really appreciate your willingness to say, this is, putting it all out there. These were the drivers, the things we had to consider for us. And I just wonder, Liz, is there anything besides, and I know we talked specifically for Jenna, what was the drivers for them to look at this as an option? Just wondered if there were any other potential, drivers that you have seen in your experience that often are indicators that are happening for people to think, ooh, maybe we need to think about the B word.
Right. Yeah, bankruptcy is certainly not, your first option. Hopefully it's because you've gone through A, B, C, and D, whether it's been trying to negotiate with your secured lender or your vendors. You should be doing a lot of other, if you can, planning, and maybe you can avoid bankruptcy altogether. But oftentimes what leads to a bankruptcy to happen is a litigation. Perhaps there's a pending judgment that is going to, cause you extreme harm. Perhaps you are leasing a facility and you received an eviction notice, and you can't be evicted, right? You're operating out of that entity or that building, and you need to remain there. So people need to file bankruptcy, or companies need to file bankruptcy at that moment to prevent an eviction. So whether it can, one event forces your hand. And what the bankruptcy does is, if you've heard of what the automatic stay is, it stops that immediately. So if you were to be served, your company was served with an eviction notice and you had to be out, you file for bankruptcy, and that stops. The whole process is halted, and the bankruptcy takes over, and the rules of the bankruptcy code take over, and it prevents that eviction from occurring. It may not prevent it all, forever, but it stops it at that moment. So whether it is a gradual, event after event or event that happens, it may be a triggering immediate event that happens.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, I'm glad that you.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Liz. We worked for 14 months to negotiate, to talk to. We did multiple things, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit. But really, what happened is we did have litigation. We did have lawsuits against us, or the former leadership, either way. And so we were able to get our debt down from 7 million to a little over 5 million. By doing lots of different things. And so our hand was pushed for our filing date, because that, 14 months later, because of a litigation, which at that point, we may not have been able to do a reorganization with a Chapter 11. We might have been talking about the L word, liquidity, in a Chapter 7, and that's something we didn't want to do, and our community didn't want that. And so we we were forced at that moment. It probably would have happened anyways, but maybe a few months down the road. But I think that is an important part of it, and a wonderful option to have that stay to be able to survive.
Yeah, absolutely right. It kind of just so that you can kind of pull up from the situation and just take a breath and just say okay. And I love that the way that you both have described it is that it was it was gradual yet immediate yet urgent, yet there's layers, right? And so planning and understanding all of the different components and guidance can really help you navigate it. So I think that's really a great perspective. For nonprofits in particular, when we think about how we're so mission driven, could you speak to Jenna a little bit about how you had to not only think about everything we just covered, but thinking about the impact that it was going to have on your mission and the services? I mean, we're talking about filling community needs with what you do. I've mentioned before that I saw you as a pillar in the community. So what does that mean when you think about the impact on the community and you think about the impact on your mission? Could you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely. I will never forget it was a few weeks in, and our equipment vendor was literally taking a semi to take away all of our equipment because they had not been paid. And I remember just literally sitting on the floor in my office and just crying. And then I was like, Jenna, get it together. And I had a 1-year-old at this time and a 6-year-old. Jenna, get it together, stay strong. And I went for a walk around our YMCA because I just needed to breathe, and I needed to see the kids in the childcare room and like see some babies and like have some joy. And I saw this one member who he spent every single day at the Y for the 24 years at that point that we had been open. Every day. He didn't exercise. He would go in the pool once in a while, but his sister would drop him off and he would have breakfast at the Y. He would talk to everyone. He would have lunch. His sister would pick him up. Without the Y, I don't know what he would have done. And then I talked to this mom in the hallway who was putting her kids into hot watch just so she could take a shower. A stay-at-home mom. She just wanted to go take a shower and put her kids in the drop-in childcare. Anyways, I just walked around and I thought about everything we do in the community. And I thought, okay, we're going to get through this. We have to get through this. And then I just kind of like told myself, okay, Jenna, come on. What are we going to do? Like, you're tough, you're strong. You don't feel like you're strong right now, but you are, and it's going to work out. And so thank God our community also, I think, considers us a pillar for what we've done over 2 decades in Marquette County. And so I'm so thankful for the community, because without their support, we wouldn't have gotten through this. The former board members, which that is any nonprofit CEO that's listening right now, that's the first thing I think you should do. And one of the most important things I did was I called the people that founded this YMCA, that started it, that put their blood, sweat, and tears into building this facility and starting the Y, who hadn't been a part of the Y for 6, 7, 8 years. I hadn't spoken to them in a couple of years, again, in my former capacity as a health and fitness director. And so it was tough, but I called those founders, the people that started the very first board, the people that met every Tuesday at this little village cafe to start the Y for years, to raise the money. And I told them, I was very transparent and honest. I told them everything. And what happened is they stepped up, they came forward, we cried, we went through a lot. And so we started having these meetings, and we called them the Friends of the Y, because they weren't our current board of directors. They were the Friends of the Y. And it was one of the main people, Michelle Butler, who stepped up and was with us, right, every step of the way, Liz. She started the Y. She was the first president. She came back. She's like, if you're in this, I'm in this. She got a lot of those very crucial business leaders, smart, very much respected leaders in our community to come back. And so we kind of had this whole Friends of the Y group, which was former board members, donors. I called everyone and apologized for what happened. I didn't personally do those things in my position, but I did. It was the right thing to do. I went back to what our mission is and our values of the Y: honesty, respect. So, and responsibility at that time, that responsibility was on my shoulders, because I said I'd be the interim CEO. And so we made phone call after phone call after phone call and told everyone what we could confidentially. And we just apologized. And we worked out little payment plans I mean, if we had $20, I mean, when I took over, the AP had $500,000 of bills we owed. And so it was like, I'm going to send you $5 this week. And we tried to do trades for our annual campaign. Can we put up a banner and for $600 to promote your business, and it'll go to our Strong Kids campaign, and then we can take $600 off your bill. I mean, there was just so much of that. And just communication and calling other leaders in our community and letting them know what was happening confidentially. So calling the president of the local university, calling other nonprofits, our donors, our volunteers. There's a lot of people that knew that this was going on before the whole community as a whole. But I think that's what actually made this successful, because we were honest right away and they helped us. The resources were unbelievable. So everyone was like in this together. And so I don't want people to think they just need to hide and only they're bored and they're in this alone. I think there's a lot of people that will step up, very smart people that will help, because they want you to survive.
Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing the vulnerability, the bold leadership for you, because I feel like those are all traits and characteristics that many of our nonprofit leaders are experiencing, and to be able to hear you, in the midst of things, in the ups and downs, getting back to the core of the organization, in the values and the mission and the work that you're doing, and then leveraging everybody who has a vested interest in it in all of the ways. I think that's just powerful things for nonprofits to be thinking about. And I just know for any nonprofit, just being able to kind of relate and hear you speak to that, I think is powerful. So thank you so much for sharing that insight, for you, but then more importantly, just providing it so it could be a guide for nonprofits and other leaders in particular that are thinking and may find themselves in this situation and what to think about. So we know that we know you leverage legal support. We know you leveraged all of the things that you just talked about. Is there any other specific things you want to call out that were resources that you leveraged, or Liz, anything you want to offer from that perspective of just thinking about the partnerships and the support and the things that a nonprofit needs to be thinking about? I think some of the things, Jenna, that you mentioned, which are, specific to the community, and not just like the broader Marquette community and the other outlying communities that you serve, but also those that are in the YMCA community and your community, right, in the board. I just wonder if there's any other, groups or partnerships or things that you want to reference that are either important to the process, Liz, of thinking about bankruptcy, or Jenna, come to mind that stand out for you that were really critical and important to your success.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jenna hit on a couple of things. One is communication. One of the, in my practice, I represent both debtors, like the YMCA of Marquette County, but I also represent a lot of creditors. And when I'm representing a creditor, whether it's a bank or a large vendor, or whoever it is, the number one thing I always hear is there was just no communication. The debtor never called us. The debtor never talked to us. We didn't know what was going on. We asked for information and we were just silenced. So we didn't trust. There was no trust there. And we felt that we had no choice but to call the note due, or to start litigation, or to do something that escalated it. So, before I got involved, it's the YMCA did everything they were supposed to do, right? They did it right. They called, they communicated, and they worked with their vendors and their secured creditors to either reduce the amount due or get extended payment plans, and everything I would recommend that they do, from the start. And so, what I would very much recommend, if you're a nonprofit and you have a major secured lender that, you're going to need their partnership in the bankruptcy case. So start that early, start that communication early. Go to them and say, hey, we're struggling financially. They know that. They're not going to be surprised by that. But the fact that you're being honest with them and you're asking them to get engaged is key to them trusting that you're going to give them information that they're going to need to make their decision. The other benefit that a nonprofit has that a for-profit company doesn't have is people really care. I mean, if I can't tell you how important the USDA was in this case and how important the other major bank and stakeholder was in this case. They stepped up big time from the start to the end to work with the Y. And because they also did not want the Y to fail. It was important to them that the Y continue. And, a lot of times if you're a for-profit, you don't have that same sort of, I guess, care. If you're a bank, you're like, well, business A goes under, okay. But if you're saying the Y or some other very important nonprofit or any nonprofit, that's, they want to help, they're going to work with you. They may not be able to forgive the amount of debt that you have due, but they may be able to extend the payment plan. They may be able to work with you on a lower interest rate. There's so many options and tools that a bank has, but you have to engage with them. And so communication and just really understanding and playing to the fact that you matter to your community in a much more personal way than most other businesses. And you should use that as leverage. You're being honest, it's real, but use that. I mean, that is an important tool that you have that a for-profit does not have.
Absolutely. And those were the hardest phone calls. People were so angry. I mean, I got yelled at. It was tough. I really had to get a strong core, my sensitive being. I was like, okay, toughen up here, girl. I mean, I actually had to move my office because there were people coming in to the facility yelling at me. I mean, there were some really angry people and a couple lawsuits. And so, yeah, like our board members had me move my office to the front so I wouldn't be in the back where something could potentially happen. It was a scary time. And those were hard phone calls, but it was the best thing we could have ever done, is just to call, tell them where we were at, and just start the conversations. And like Liz said, engage them. And some people they didn't want to work with us, and that's okay, but most did. I would say 98% did. And the USDA, that was Michelle Butler, our board president, and my first phone call.